sheet mulching. So it's a way to take a lawn or a weedy patch or a cover cropped patch and turn it into a quick, fast garden. How do we get those transplants in the ground and make sure that they are off running? And so now we've mowed this patch. We've given it just a little bit of amendment. We made sure our earthworms are going to be well fed. We've got a little dusting of compost. We've got a little bit of mulched material and a little bit of mineral blend. And now we're going to lay down our cardboard. And so this is the way I like to go. I like a cardboard that covers a lot of space and has very little breaks. Having a large sheet of compost is nice, or of cardboard, excuse me. Cardboard is nice because you don't have to worry about the seams breaking, the flaps popping up. You really want to make sure you have good coverage, and you want it to be, you know, a good dense cardboard. You could use newspaper for this, but you're gonna have to use so many layers, you know, 10, 15 layers to make up for the thickness of this cardboard. What we're doing, it's a process called occultation. We are blocking the light from the plants below. Sad, we're doing that. We're gonna kill these plants down here, but we're gonna put more plants in. It's a fast way to get a garden started. It's something that you can do in the fall to prep for the next spring's garden, or in a hurry, you can do it in the spring when you need to get your transplants in and you are just kind of dealing with what you have. And so if you're gonna grab cardboard, try to make sure it's a big piece. If it's not a big piece, you're gonna need to make sure that it's overlapped by at least 18 inches or so. We'll show you how to do that. I pre-hydrate this compost, or this cardboard. It's been outside since I gathered it last fall. So it's gone through many rain cycles. But when I brought it over here, I hit it with a hose, and we'll do that again in just a moment. The reason why is you want it to be soft. You want it to be easy for you to break through to get a transplant hole prepared. But you want it to be dense enough so that the weeds aren't breaking through it too rapidly. This cardboard is good quality cardboard. You also want a cardboard that doesn't have a lot of print material on it, or tape or staples or anything like that. If you have a lot of that, try to take that off. All it is going to be trash in your garden later if you leave that in. The ink could be an ink that you don't want to have incorporated into your soil. You decide, but use what you've got and get it hydrated before you get started. You can soak this in a tub, like a livestock tub, or you know, any receptacle that you have that is able to handle large pieces of cardboard. And so you kind of want to match up your cardboard to make sure that you are overlapping. Grass is pretty tenacious. It will grow up and out looking for that sunlight, especially something like couch grass, or you know, any grass that has a rhizome. It's pretty tenacious. It's got a lot of energy in its roots, and so it'll find the light, and it can go, you know, feet to find the light. And so try to overlap your cardboard by at least 18 inches to make sure that you aren't going to have grass growing up through the cracks. Sometimes if your cardboard is too thin, you might want to double it up. This cardboard is nice and thick. We don't have to worry about doubling it up, but we are going to be conscious of the overlap. This is a nice big piece. It's got a lot of breaks in it. So what I'm going to do is just cut it in half. Just orient it the other way. So when you're making your sheet mulched area, consider how much topping material you have. And so sheet mulched beds can be very complex, or they can be pretty simple. We're going to make a relatively simple version of it because of timing, and again, we're just trying to get some quick garden space set. So We've got our pre-dressing of the soil that we just did, but also we're going to top this cardboard with some mulch material and some other substrates. If you were doing a more complex sheet mulching process, if you were doing this in the fall, you might go through the whole process of going high nitrogen right over your cardboard. So the cardboard itself, that's very high carbon. Any paper material, woody material, anything that is far removed from being green and alive is going to be high carbon. So we've got a high carbon material. If you were going to let this rest over the winter, or if you had a longer period of time to wait, you would put a really high nitrogen material on top of this cardboard, something like a semi-aged manure, a high nitrogen compost, a very high nitrogen plant material like the alfalfa and the clover in a deep layer. We're going to do a little bit of that, but not a whole lot. The point here is to make sure that this cardboard is completely covered, because it is a wick for moisture. If we don't cover it completely, then the moisture that is inside this cardboard and that we want to have retained in the soil, the moisture that condenses on the backside of this cardboard and hydrates the cardboard, would wick out of the edges of the cardboard if it's not completely covered. And so that's why I want you to be conscious of the amount of material you have to cover your cardboarded space. We have plenty of material on the farm, and so if we don't have enough right here, right now to demonstrate the process, we'll do a complete area so you can see what it looks like. But just know that you need to make sure that this cardboard is very well covered so you don't wick moisture away from the soil and away from your plants. So I'm going to give it a nice wash down, a rinsing, a hydration right now. Then we'll start moving in some of our mulch material. So this is more of that grass, fresh grass, and then also some dried grass material that has just been sitting on the surface from mowing a couple of days ago. It's been drying in the sun, and so it's almost like a hay. And so that's a little more carbon rich than, say, the green, freshly mowed material. Some of this nitrogen is already gassed off. This is still very much contained here, but it is still pretty high nitrogen. It's also mixed with oak leaves, so that's kind of a mix. So I would say this is probably like it's not a 30-to-1, maybe it's like a, 10-to-1, 15-to-1. Either way, it's gonna be our first layer. Kind of high nitrogen, but still a decent amount of carbon. None of this, as you can see, is going to be actively mixed into the soil. Even the stuff under the cardboard is not going to be actively mixed into the soil. When you are considering adding mulch material, high carbon especially, be aware that you don't want to mix in undecomposed material that's high carbon into the soil profile, because that ends up being a bit of a nutrient tie-up. You've got the biology in the soil that's going to want to start breaking that material down, and a lot of that first stage of breakdown is done by bacteria, and bacteria are organisms that need a lot of nitrogen in order to maintain their unique chemistry. They are a high nitrogen organism, kind of a 7-to-1, can be a little lower. And so in order for a bacteria to start the process of breaking down that high carbon material in the soil, they've got to acquire nitrogen from somewhere. And if you've just transplanted into that bed, that nitrogen is no longer available to your plants because it's being taken by the bacteria first. It'll eventually become available when those bacteria die or get eaten, but not until that material is broken down completely. So don't mix high carbon material into the soil unless it's completely broken down, like the compost that I was showing you. I've also got a little horse manure that's been aged for about 4 years. It's pretty broken down. It's mixed, you know, it had a bedding material in it, a high carbon bedding material. Something like that, I still wouldn't mix that into the soil. When you do mix something like a fresh cover crop or, you know, a green lush material into the ground, into the soil, if it's high nitrogen material, you're feeding the bacteria and you're going to get a flush of bacterial growth, which can be a benefit to the plants that you've just planted, depending if they are primarily more bacterial oriented. So something like kale or chard or lettuce or something like that would probably appreciate fresh green material mixed into the soil. It's not as detrimental. All right. Those beautiful geese. Gonna stay standing? Some of that well-aged horse manure that was at the bottom of that wheelbarrow. It'll help weigh down the cardboard quite nicely. And then this is a lot of that half-dried, half-fresh grass clippings. And our goal here is just to get the surface covered so that we're not losing moisture. And we've got a ready-made mulched space to plant into. If we were doing a lasagna garden bed, we would have laid down the high nitrogen, couple different types maybe. We would do compost, we would do manure, maybe some fresh green plant material. We would have topped it with a high carbon rich material. That could be straw, that could be wood chips, that could be sawdust, it could be a mix of all three of those. It could be chopped up cardboard. You can run your mower over some old cardboard or newspaper, pick that up with the grass. That's a nice mix. Just depends on what you have. Think about your resources, what you have, and how you can treat them in order to get what you need. And so if you need something that's high carbon, you know, there are many options in a yard on a farm that could become high carbon. Any standing dead plant material that started to lose its green is going to be high carbon. So you can take that material. If it can be ran over with your mower, if you have a bagged mower, it's awesome. Break it up by hand if you need to. Use your oak leaves great carbon-rich material. But the idea again is you've got a mix of high nitrogen and high carbon, covering that cardboard, making sure that it's not going to be wicking moisture away from your soil, and that you've got a mulched area. And it can be pretty lofty, especially with a multi-layer sheet mulched, like a lasagna bed. It can be pretty lofty. That's okay. You again want to make sure that that cardboard has good soil contact. And that'll happen as it starts to age. It will become more settled, less pushed away from the soil. As it starts to break down, it will seal very nicely to the soil. And usually if you've got a highly biologically active soil with lots of earthworms, that cardboard is no longer going to be present in a year's time, maybe 6 months' time. Just depends. But you'll have created a permanent bed here that has a good mulch layer that you no longer have to weed. So that looks pretty good. I think that's a good start. All right. So that's our little sheet mulched bed, quick. You know, a 15-minute, 20-minute sheet mulched bed if you have your materials prepared and ready. Again, I could top this right now, and I will in just a moment, with some fall leaves or some oak leaves, just to get a nice carbon-rich material on the top, but you could also use your straw. Yeah, so next module, we'll do a little bit of transplanting, but we're also going to talk about container gardens.